Welcome to Prose Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
Welcome to episode 3 of the Precipice Fiction pod and videocast, which we've just decided we're going to call Prose and Cons. That's right, Prose and Cons. Thank you, Alex, for that humdinger of a pun. I am going to be hosting today. My name is Paddy Boylan. Joining me are my co-hosts, Ali Burnham.
Hello.
And Alex Eldridge.
Hello. You have a really good podcast voice, Paddy. I didn't realize you had like a podcast.
Thank you very much.
Voice.
And is this the first time we did our last names? I feel like we've been slack and we haven't done last names.
I think last names is good. I think it's good.
No, well done.
More social media friendly. Thank you very much. I'm copying every podcast I've ever listened to. Now we decided we want to get straight to the theme of today's show, or at least the theme that we're going to attempt to build the show around. And that for today is world building. How much is necessary in order to build a convincing world for your audience and for your characters to live in? Is that more or less what we decided today?
Yeah, pretty much.
The big old umbrella of world building.
The big old umbrella of world
we will
building.
tackle in 40 minutes.
Before we get into that, what have we all been watching, listening, reading, consuming? Alex, what have you been diving into lately?
I've been consuming two pieces of media that come to mind.
Consuming.
The first one is that I started listening to it a while ago. It's a podcast called Operator. It's basically a podcast documentary series about the phone sex industry in the 90s, and it is fascinating.
I've heard about this.
One of the best podcasts I have ever listened to. Like, fascinating. I was absolutely enthralled. So I really recommend that. It's called Operator. I think it's free on Spotify. So check that out if you get a chance. And also this other song that I actually showed you yesterday. Let me read out the chorus. It's this old song from like 2009. It's got that very sort of electro indie sort of sound, but it just has this incredibly creepy chorus that I'm like, I could make something out of that.
Yeah, so, you mentioned it had a Wasp Factory vibes.
Yeah, Wasp Factory by
Ian Banks.
Ian Banks, yeah, not Ian M. Banks, Ian Banks. So the chorus of that goes, it's kind of like heavy guitar rock, but the chorus goes, he knows that if he doesn't do the things his body asks him to, he'll waste away, he's paralyzed, his bones will split and multiply. I just think that's terrifying in the best way possible. So
metal.
Yeah. It's wonderfully ambiguous. I don't know what it means, but it makes me uncomfortable.
There's a lot in there, it's very, Anyway, I've been listening to that mainly.
Lyrics is still literature. Ali, what have you been up to, consuming wise?
Most recently, Witcher, finally getting across Witcher season 2 on Netflix.
I haven't delved into Witcher yet.
Okay, I really actually enjoyed what they did in season 1 with its strange timeline jumping that actually really forced you to concentrate and follow along with what was going on. But they got a lot of complaints that it was very confusing and people didn't like it. So season 2, they've done away with the timeline hopping and now it's just all chronological. So for me, I feel like it's lost a bit of pizzazz that I actually really liked about season 1.
That's a shame.
Yeah, but it's at the same time, it's taking a bit more time to get to know the characters, I guess, is the benefit of not doing it jumping.
You know, having not seen it at all, I'm kind of speaking out my ass, but I could see that being an expectation thing. Like you're going to watch some presumably lighthearted Henry Cavill stuff with like monster fighting and stuff. Maybe the audience just isn't kind of expecting something that requires concentration and any kind of brain power.
Yeah, no, it's doing a good job of trying to speak to both audiences. So the audiences that are coming not only from book context, but game context. So there's an insane amount of world to absorb there. And then the people who just tune in because they're like, oh, Henry Cavill with a blonde wig and a big sword. So it's trying to speak to both. And maybe this season has been pared down more for the latter audience, while season 1 was like, yeah, no, we've got a set fan base. We're going to name drop all the things, and a lot of it just would have gone over a lot of heads, I think.
Right. Because it is quite in depth, isn't it? It's like, there's a lot of lore. Like there's like it's like a 5-book series or something originally, right?
Yeah, no, I've only read the first book. And even then, the nature of that book is it likes to jump about and it doesn't hold your hand through it. It's like we've got this, it's almost episodic, which is really interesting. It's like, here's this little contained short story, here's this little contained story. So I can see how it's gone to television like really easily. But at the same time, the games have the more like linear storyline, I guess. So they get to do both.
And speaking of the games, I'm actually finally playing the third Witcher game.
Hey,
I've had a potato for a computer for a long time. It could barely run Doom, and now I've got this mission control machine next to me. And the games are great, and as literature, they're absolutely fantastic. I almost shed a tear the other day in one of the particular storylines. I won't go into details on which one, but man, it is so well written. I guess when you've got wonderful source material to draw from, it's a shame not to use that and write something that's really good.
I love the kind of TV shows where you know they're wink wink nudge nudge games. For example, a lot of season 2 is Cavill's in his lab like dissecting monsters and refilling potions, and like a lot of that is the plot, and like a part of the gamer in me is sitting on the couch being like, no, I would rather be in the lab dissecting monsters and refilling my potions. It's a weird thing to watch Cavill do that and not be a part of that experience.
Yeah, it would be the post level up process. Finally we're getting to see it on screen.
He's gone back to his gone back to the castle. The name escapes me, but he's just there to regenerate and refill all these things. And I'm like, this is such just like a weird game cutscene that we're watching unfold.
I dig that. It would make for a good montage either way.
It's fun.
Oh, it's a season. It's not a montage, but it's a bold decision.
That is a bold decision. I'm going to start watching a Witcher eventually. And we may have discussed this in a previous episode. We may not have, but Ali, you and I are also both consuming Moby Dick in different formats.
Yes.
Oh, and Alex. Yeah, we're all consuming Dick. Did we talk about this in episode 1?
We did briefly, yeah.
We did. No, I've been slack. I'm probably not even quite halfway. It's because wider context of my life. I did have a job where I drove a lot, and so I would listen to a lot of audiobooks. I don't have that job anymore, so I haven't been doing any driving, and I'm suddenly not listening to audiobooks anymore. So I need to sort out how I'm going to fix this. But I'm going to blame this job loss on why I haven't finished Moby Dick yet.
Yeah, it's definitely the silver lining of unemployment, all the audiobooks and podcasts you get to listen to.
This is that topic too, actually. She's just come over and she doesn't drive anymore, so she's not listening or watching as much stuff, like listening to, not watching obviously in the car, listening to as much material as she would have. But I'm like, but you're on the train, and she's like, yeah, but now I'm reading. So I don't know, I guess wait for the bitch.
Yeah, reading on the train is nice. I really like reading on public transport.
I get motion sickness. When I first started uni, I had to do an hour commute either way on the train, and I was so excited to be that person, the film kid who read books to and from uni every day. First 5 minutes into the first train ride, I'm like, I'm gonna vomit. So I had to stop buying books after that, because it had to become audiobooks because I get motion sickness reading.
That's a shame. It's a beautiful thing. You feel very cultured.
I miss the romance of it.
It's so romantic. Yeah. So you can still have a baguette and wear a beret while you listen to your audiobooks. It's not quite the same, but it's still romantic with a capital R. Writing, gentlefolk, what have we been writing lately, if we've been writing anything? I know you guys tend to write a lot more than I do at the moment. Alex?
I've probably documented this a little bit before, but the way I write is really dumb. Like I'll just vomit it out. I call it vomiting it out. I'll vomit out the whole book. I've done this kind of twice now, or most of it, and then like I'll be like, I'm taking a break, and then I'll come back and finish that off, and then I'll get to the end and be like, oh no, that was a terrible idea. And so now I'm having to go in and like forceps take out huge chunks of it and rewrite them, and then go like, that doesn't fit, and like but having the standard structure of the whole book gives me a great sense of comfort. It's like, okay, I've written it now, I've like vomited it up, it's there now, at least I know where it starts and where it ends, right? So I've just been going in and filling in little sections, like going, okay, well this subplot is garbage, I don't know where that giant hand came on. We're getting rid of that. I'm going to throw a sex scene in there. Like, I'm not even kidding. And yeah, so I've just been replacing some of those little threads and things, little big threads, frankly. So I've been doing that. It's been mainly rearranging more than like doing a lot of writing.
You know, you say it's a bad way to go, but I'm actually thinking that on the next long form thing I try, I really want to have a stab at doing that. Just write it all out, maybe not even have other people see it, and not obsess over whether or not it's good enough, which I tend to do way too much.
Time for that later.
Yeah, there really is. And you still have a pretty fast pace of writing, Alex. So I don't know. It's something I want to try.
If I lean into it, I can go pretty quick. I think I did it. It's the last thing I was doing that was like novel length. It got to about 50,000 words before I was like, I'm going to put that on the shelf. It got to about, I calculated it and I'd written almost exactly 1,000 words a day. Now, sometimes I was writing 1,500, sometimes it was like 800, you know, but it averaged out to almost exactly 1,000 a day. So it's a pretty decent pace, I think.
Ali, what's on your writing desk at the moment?
Yes, no, I'm still quite obsessed with my historical fiction. I'm in a similar surgery editing / rewrite stage that it sounds like Alex is in the middle of. I guess I'm calling it my draft 3, but it kind of came about where I'd stepped away for it for a while, did some big picture thinking about it, decided to, I guess, just reapproach. I think I talked about how I just wanted to age it up a little bit. So I'm kind of ripping out anywhere I feel like I've over-explained anything. Just to aim it for an older audience and see if I can actually have a crack at making this a little bit more literary.
We're talking about Cyprus, right?
We are talking about Cyprus.
You know, that really didn't strike me as personally as like very young adult. I never read and thought like, oh, I think someone who's 16 to 18 would enjoy this. Like I thought it was like quite an adult, mature piece already.
I appreciate that, Paddy. And I guess further advice I'd gotten was to go more in that direction and I guess be more deliberate about it. So where I think some of maybe my YA flavor accidentally influenced some choices I made, now I can go back with a lens and being like, I'm going to do that a little bit less. And
I'm curious what you're talking about specifically.
I guess in terms of how I'm shaping the comedy, I've been told to think of it more as I'm going to call this dark comedy. Therefore, I'm removing some of my like ha-ha comedy moments, if that makes sense. Or I'm just trying to frame it a little bit different. And something I learned, I guess, yeah, we've talked about how I'm very action driven, while literary as a genre wants to spend a bit more time
gazing at its own navel.
Yeah, well, the environmental stuff, or like rather than just the character thinking, it's where we get opportunities to look at the ocean, and
I was just thinking, looking
and we're
out
going
the
to
ocean.
imbue the external environment with the emotions trying to communicate. So it's not big changes, but I guess I'm just minute toolkit stuff I'm picking through it and just trying to change big picture lenses. So this is just a sit down full read of it. At least I'm doing about 2 scenes a day, combing through it, just readjust. So it's like my plot's not changing, not big actions changing, but just small tweaks to send it more in this new direction. I've also sat down and done like a new batch of research. So how I was researching was I did a whole heap and then I wrote the thing. And then now I've gone back and I'm like, I'm going to go a bit deeper into research. And I've actually discovered some new cool things. Actually, so I have this photocopy of a court transcript that's handwritten. That is my main character's like legal testimony. I haven't been able to read it because of the handwritings from 1820. I contacted a lady in Scotland who transcribed it for me, and I got that back 2 days ago. So I've been able to read it, and again, no new information that's like upended my plot, thankfully, but there's just small fun details where I'm like, oh, Will thinks that guy is a drunk, so now I get to genuinely go through and like have him call him a drunk at every opportunity, because I'm like, this is based on his real words, and just exciting little fun discoveries like that.
For context, ladies and gentlemen, Ali is writing a piece of historical fiction based on actual events. I don't know how much I want to spoil, but there's a mutiny on a ship and a whole convict escapade because we're Australians and all of our forefathers are criminals. And I found it really interesting going through trying to work out which bits were actually from history. And I found out later on, it's a lot of the more outrageous scenes and things that are less, I don't want to say less believable, but just more larger than life tend to be the real stuff.
100%. And again, that's why, yeah, the comedy has been the only lens I can approach this through, because I'm like, these insane things actually
Insane
happened.
is the right word.
More of this is true than the audience is going to think on first read is actually true. And that's a fun game, because then it lets me to get away with the small things I do want to invent. But all my big set pieces are as accurate as I can get them from what I can read.
Nice stuff. Cyprus coming to a bookstore near you, hopefully. And I've been writing absolutely nothing. Moving on to the topic of the day, world building. How much is too much? How much is not enough? At what point will the audience get annoyed? So I'm part of a lot of world building groups on Facebook, which I was just saying in the pre-show chat, and there's a lot of people hand-wringing and fretting about their world building, really trying to paint every single little corner of it as brightly and colorfully as they can, which always strikes me as too much and maybe a little unnecessary. Guys, any thoughts about world building?
Yes, I have thoughts. I have many thoughts. Sorry, Ali, if I was jumping in and cutting you off. No. I have thoughts. So I actually tend to write fairly sparsely. I don't know if you guys would agree with that. I'd say most of what I do is fairly sparse. So I actually struggle a little bit with the world painting aspect. Like, if I'm going to get a paragraph of like, this is how this street looked like. This was like I wrote a market a couple of a couple months ago, and was like, oh wow, there's so much opportunity here for me to like flesh this out and do all these, and like I don't know if you guys struggle with this, but I was like, yeah, paragraph, that's it. That's all I can wring from this. Like I just the idea of like world building for the sake of world building, while I'm not opposed to it because it does add a lot of flavor, I find it exhausting to write to a degree and to read for a long period. So if I can just have a minor diatribe for a second within my diatribe. I don't know if any of you guys, actually, I 100% know you guys have read this. The Redwall books, Ryan Jacques he would spend 3 pages describing a feast. And I'm like, bro, I get it. The apples were caramelized, okay? Like the turkey was so
I do remember the honey apples, though.
It's just so much. And I'm like, look, I really like this story. I like the badger. He's going to go kill some dudes. Like, but his mom's got an issue. Like, this is great. But it's too much feasting, you know? So I don't know. I guess that's a roundabout way of saying, like, I really like some flavor. I love the flavor. But it's so easy to go overboard in terms of just environmental painting, say. So that's the hill I'm going to die on for now.
I guess the nice thing about reading is you can always just flip a few pages over to see what the feast is. Like, okay,
I can't do that. It would be dishonest, I feel, like, mentally.
I love it because it's this tension between why a writer chooses to write and why a reader chooses to read. And I think world building is right at the heart of this little sticky argument. Like I know that like sci-fi and fantasy, the reason I gravitate towards these genres and the genres I want to write is quite possibly because of the world building. It is the genre where we get to have the most fun with it. But then even and as a reader, I gravitate towards these genres because I do like good world building. But the what a writer gets out of world building is not what a reader gets out of world building.
That's absolutely true.
And I found that beta readers definitely do like context. They'll complain if they don't have enough context, but it definitely needs to be a spoonful of sugar with your paragraphs. They don't want to be able to notice they've just been spoon-fed world building. If they can pick it out on a page, they get mad. It needs to be a sneaky, like underhanded way that they can absorb the world building. They will like it, they'll have a great time, but they can't know that that's what they're being fed.
Sometimes when you're reading something that has a lot of world building, the entire story will stop and then it's world building time, and for the next few paragraphs, like, okay, well, now we're in world building mode, and it can be a little boring sometimes. Two works that I can think of that I've read in the last few years that do world building really well. The first one is not Ian Banks. I've completely forgotten his name. He's an English writer. Anyway, he wrote a book called Machines Like Me, which is like an alternate history, England 1960s. This guy buys an android. The world building is really dense. He needs to explain how the timelines diverged, why it is it's the 1960s and he's sitting in front of a personal computer doing electronic day trading. But he doesn't stop the story at any point. The world building is always, the story is told from the main character's point of view. And he always does the world building through the character is observing things in the world. And the world building is threaded through with his observations and his ideas and what he feels. So the world building is always like paired with something that's quite engaging. Like he'll talk about, like he looks out the window and he can see the protests in the street. And he doesn't stop the story and talk about why the protests happened. He talks about like how he feels about that and what side of the protest he would be on if he was out in the street, stuff like that. Which, like you were saying, Ali, making it a spoonful of sugar to make the world building easier. He does that so deftly. It's threaded really, really well between those two. The other one is Shadow of the Torturer by Gene Wolfe. The whole thing is dense world building beginning to end. But again, because the main character is thinking about it and talking about it and interacting with it, it feels more conversational than lecture-y.
Yeah, no, that's made me stop and reflect on some complaints I've received from my own. I'm like, oh shit, that's a good idea. Why didn't I do that? Because ultimately in my fantasy work, I have a main character who's quite disinterested in the world. She's young teenager, hates everything. So she doesn't care about the politics. And she's on a journey to start caring about it. But at the start of your novel, when you need to set up the world, I have a character who doesn't want to think about the world too much. So you've just highlighted for me a problem I have and a new way I might be able to think about it. But yes, that it's trying to feed in the world building because I have a character who's ultimately quite disinterested and they're not actively participating in the politics. So what's a natural way for the politics to come through?
What is the natural way for the politics to come through? How do you resolve that?
Yeah, no, she gets forced into a lot of situations.
Deus Ex Machina, baby. It makes me think of Day the Triffids that I just read. Like that is actually kind of a masterclass in world building, but there's a backstory issue. Like there's one bit where it's like, let me explain where these potentially came from, but maybe not. Like, and that's just.
What do you mean? Wait, what?
It's ostensibly from like written by a kind of a diary, like just a guy being like, I am transcribing the history of this world, and then he's like, but then also maybe this happened, and he just describes possibly where these giant plant zombie things came from. So it's kind of like. He'll start on something and it'll be really good just sorry to give you some background. It's basically the first zombie novel, except the zombies are giant killer plants.
8 foot tall ambulatory plants that blind people.
It's so good. They're just like they just remind me of like the piranha plants in Mario, except they can walk. You know? But yeah, like halfway through there's this like, hey, let me just break down how everything sort of works now, and that was but the rest of it. Immaculate. You know?
I actually didn't finish the book because maybe about 2/3 of the way through, I did feel it became bogged down with a little bit too much explaining. Yeah, it was a long time ago. I was probably like 18, so maybe I didn't have the attention span. But I felt like the story stopped and this is what's going on started. Yeah. Again, take that with a grain of salt because this was a really long time ago.
Yeah, it does pick. Look, the last half of it is a little slow, and to be honest, the ending is a little anticlimactic. Like it really could have.
Now there's giant plants everywhere.
But I mean, exactly. What are we gonna do with these giant plants?
Sad trombone noise.
Yeah. But look, to go on to a slightly adjacent topic, I don't know. I think it's character first. For me personally. A lot of where I come from is starting with a character and pitching everything based on where the character and those characters interact. And then the world has to sort of fit its way around that. Because I'm always terrified of losing reader attention, you know? So I don't know, how do you guys feel about that?
Yeah, it reminds me of how I've heard it described before that a story is a 3-legged stool. Of character, plot, and world building, and you're going to have a weird looking stool If one of these is shorter than the other or thicker than the other, or one's really thin, it's not going to be able to stand. So it's a fun little metaphor for describing how they all need to work in tandem, and you can't prioritize one over the other. It's fun. I thought this morning about some of my own examples. If I have changed plot or character because of world building, or vice versa, a character choice has made me go back and change my world building. And again, this the YA fantasy I'm working on, at the core of it, I have like these 5 magic swords. And I think chick and egging it.
The eggening.
The eggening. I think I had the concept that I wanted 5 magic swords. I think I kind of started there. And I knew that these swords would choose who was able to wield them. And then I had great fun developing my 5 characters who were going to end up with these swords, kind of the end game. But as a part of my world building, I had to sit down and be like, great, I have magic swords that choose people. How does that actually work? What is the magic system? Blah, blah, blah. Do all that work. And getting out the other side of all that world building, and I knew how the rules around the swords worked, I actually changed who my end game 5 characters were going to be, because I'm like, well, if that's how the swords work, they would actually choose this character. So it had this knock-on effect that I did adjust my end game plot after sitting down and doing my world building.
That sounds like a good example of creative constraints. You know, the idea that sometimes if you have complete total freedom, it can be paralyzing and you don't know what you're going to do. But when there's some constraints in process in place, even if they're self-imposed, it can lead you down interesting directions that you wouldn't have normally chosen. Is that the kind of thing that happened with yours, Ali?
Yeah, no, I think it got better because of that. So like I love fantasy and sci-fi because at least I know for me, it usually starts with a question that might be more world building than, say, character or plot. So I'm thinking of like Y: The Last Man. It's like you start with a concept with, you're like, what if a virus wiped out all of men and the world was just populated by women? And so the world building has created what is going to kick off your plot. You're like, great, now how is this question explored? That's my plot. And then it's like, well, now I think about who are the characters who will be the vehicles for extrapolating this question that I've started with.
At that point, it's almost like the world building is telling the story and you're just dictating from the world building.
So I really like what Alex is saying about character, and a story is going to flounder without character. But personally, for me, I usually do start with world building, and I think that's a dangerous place to start. But if done well, it can inform plot. And then for me, when I'm working out the plot, I'm like, well, what kind of crazy person's going to make all these decisions? Who are they? And then I come around to character.
I don't know. I have a feeling that a lot of fantasy writers would work like that. Like, fantasy writers are all big geeks, and big geeks love to world build and pontificate and theory craft. I'd be surprised if my headphones just came out of my head. I'd be surprised if the big fantasy writers didn't spend years like kind of thinking about their ideas in the shower and then finally get down and sit down to write it with this big like mental Bible ready.
Yeah, I mean, it's like if you start with, I come from that same perspective as like, oh, this is a fun idea, like, and I've done that a lot in short stories and sort of gone like, okay, what if you know, the Four Horsemen modernized, you know, and no, actually, no, it wasn't even that. I started with the concept of like an Arizona desert truck stop, just because it's just so Americana. So I was like, this is a really rich place to start, and it did wind up being really interesting. But a lot of other times I've started with an idea first, and it's just been like, oh, this actually isn't going anywhere. Like I had the idea of like a library of people's death memories, essentially, which I thought was really strong as a concept.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty cool idea, but then I got to the end of it and I just hated the story, and I'm like, I finished it, but I'm like, I'm never gonna redraft this. I want nothing to do with it. But yeah, so it can. But then there's, you know, characters influencing the plot, and then the world building influencing the characters, and those, I guess there's that interplay between those two components where it's like, well, between us, we're probably going to figure out a way forward that's narratively functional.
It's that fun interplay of also not being so strict. So you can do all the research, all the notes, all the shower navel gazing. But if the character really needs to make a decision, letting them have the freedom to make that decision.
Totally.
And you're like, no, this emotional payoff is what I actually need to work towards. Oh, I will go back and bend my world building if need be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was about to say something kind of on that. The last kind of fantasy world thing I worked on, the world that I'm writing the trader in, I had a bunch of world building, but none of it's so concrete that I couldn't or didn't want to bend it as needed. There's something nice in having like a not totally set in stone world, because like sometimes if you just want something to happen in the story, you can just invent a piece of world building or change a piece of world building on the fly in order to enable that. And I guess maybe it could be dangerous if you make a decision that you now have to live with that ends up being worse or contradictory, but I don't know. I haven't encountered that so far.
I think a lot about that, about like, because most of the stuff will just be on the fly. Because as you might have heard the last podcast, it was the one before, I can't remember. Anyway, but like with research, very minimal research. So I'll just sort of make it up as I go. And then a part of me is going like, well, what if you continue this world? Like, you're going to have to live with this decision that you're making right now. Because if you think of that in terms of I don't know, like in terms of Lord of the Rings canon or something, like if Sam like is disabled at the beginning, that is a huge butterfly effect, just as an example, as one thing. Or if Gandalf just doesn't come by for it, the butterfly effect is massive. So you've got this potential overbearing, crushing weight of consequence on you that I guess you just try your best not to think about.
I think that's how writers go mad. I think there's a point of like, you sometimes just have to go with it. And that's for future self to think about.
Yeah, totally. But you have to trust yourself and the process.
You do, yes.
I have a fun example of trying to bend the world building to my plot when the world is actually historical fiction, things that actually happened. So in my plot, I want some certain things to happen, and it's based on loose facts. I know my main character served in the Navy and what rough years he served in the Navy, but there's no way of knowing, say, what ship he served on or what exact wars or battles he was a part of, if any. And I've made the character decision that he has a little bit of PTSD from his Navy days. So then I'm like, well, in my world building, what boat did he actually serve on? What Navy battle am I referring to that he has PTSD from? So I get to research every active vessel a part of the British Royal Navy for those two span years. I get to. So lucky that I get to trawl all these pages to find a ship that could have sensibly docked in England the year he joined the Navy and then was also back in England the year he was discharged, to kind of explain how it was possible for him to have existed on this boat. So I have finally picked a boat after almost a year and a half, because it hasn't been too easy to pick one. And so it's me. Now I'm shaping what is real. I'm now saying he was on this boat because it was kind of my best option. And similar with like passenger records, I didn't quite have the right name of a convict transported at the right year. I wanted him transported because of plot reasons. So I'm actually changing his name so he can match a convict record. So it's this fun interplay that the small things I do get to make up, but trying to justify them within the world building, which is the real world.
If and when Cyprus does get picked up and get big, you're going to have a historic pedant saying like, well, actually, there's no way that ship could have been in that harbor at that time. It was here, or this particular sailor.
Yeah, you're like, no way it was that boat. That boat never sailed that far. No, they never engaged in that many battles. He had PTSD from swabbing decks. You're making crap up. Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to happen. But I guess we write for the 90% that has no idea, right?
Exactly.
Any final closing thoughts on world building? I feel like we could actually talk about this subject forever.
Yeah.
I did have some final thoughts about, obviously we can, a whole other podcast about hard world building versus soft world building.
I actually don't know what that means.
So my understanding of it is, say someone like Brandon Sanderson has come along and made really popular this idea that a magic system almost needs to function like a science.
Yeah, he's got some interesting stuff to say about that, actually. Hard magic systems and soft magic systems, right?
And really giving the audience all the tools. So he does this great thing where he'll absolutely set up exactly how the magic system's going to work. So if you're reading along closely enough, you can predict like the end of his story, because you're like, oh, obviously this final twist with the power up, I could have guessed this if I was paying enough attention to like all the tracks he laid with how the
now I feel
worked.
guilty for not guessing any of the twists. Do you think you can actually
I would say not with Stormlight, but probably with Mistborn you can. He probably does give enough seeds in Mistborn that you're like, oh, naturally this next medal will be able to do this, so I guess that this is the power up they're going to get.
You were way ahead of me on that then. I was just along for the ride.
well yes, no, I when I read, this is why I do love world building, because I do get that weird kick out of needing to know every detail. I am one of the few readers, I think, who I'm like, give me all the world building so I can solve the puzzle. But then the soft magic system is your more background, where the author in no way is going to spoon feed you anything. The downside is sometimes those last minute power-ups come out of nowhere, because you're like, how does the world work? Who knows? Who cares? Does the writer
I'm thinking
even know?
I'm thinking Lord of the Rings.
He
doesn't explain the magic. He doesn't need to explain the magic. And in some ways the book is stronger for it, because it's this mysterious Deus Ex
and you
thing.
can say it can feel more real because we don't know everything. Sometimes things are unexpected, and maybe that is meant to be the essence of magic, that we don't fully understand it. So I love all that side of the argument as well. And I kind of asked myself, because if I do have a taste for hard magic systems, when would I prefer soft magic systems? And I actually think I really prefer it in my Ghibli movies. That kind of background soft magic system is just beautiful. It's just environmental. It's rich. You can't say it's not there.
It's more spiritual almost, right? It's the mystery is part of the whole shtick.
Yes.
As opposed to Sanderson, who is scientific and industrial and rigorous.
What my last words about world building, I think Ali kind of nailed it, like with the three-legged stool metaphor there. It's sort of like, look, it's great to have, but you don't want to lean too hard on any of those one legs, in this case, world building. And for me, that means I really have a taste for people who are able to, for authors who are able to thread something into it. Look, if I really like the book and I'm really interested into the specifics of the whatever it is itself, I'll let you get away with, a couple of pages of like, let me just talk about this for a bit. But like, that's a pretty specific instance. Like, I have to be really invested.
And an author they need to really earn it, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like action, like you can't just have action every page, because then it has no meaning, Action, I see it as a payoff. In the same sense, explaining world building is almost a payoff for like, there's all these things happening. I don't understand how they're working together. I need you to explain to me how they work. And then it's like, okay, I'll give you an info dump, Like, that's kind of the setting in which that might be appropriate.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Once you're craving it, it feels really good to have it. Yeah. It's when you're not craving it that it feels kind of forced on you.
Yeah, I don't care how the teleportals work, man. I never will. Like, I'm sorry.
I think I kind of want to know how the teleporters work now. I kind of want to know how the teleporters work. Well, we've flogged this dead horse as long as we can. Moving on, we are all writers, of course, and we write for fun and for profession. Who has something to read today?
I got something.
There we go.
Got something. Hang on, let me just bring it up on the screen. Okay, so this should be sharing now. Can you guys see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, cool. So this is I think this is probably the first short story I wrote that I really liked. That I was like, this is good. This is solid. I later found out that I'd inadvertently sort of ripped the concept off, what is it? Good Omens?
Good Omens. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd never read it by when I wrote this, but apparently that was very big at the time. So, a bunch of short story editors came back to me and were like, this sounds like Good Omens. I was like, well, okay. Anyway, the thing I like about this is that the world building, I think, is very clear, very early. I don't think too much is explained, but I think it's rich enough that you get a sense of it. Anyway, that's my feeling about it. You guys may feel differently.
All right.
Okay, well, I will go. The Last All-American Stallion. I'll read about 600 words. Lou Peralta wiped his hands on his overalls and looked out into the mid-afternoon Arizona sunshine. It was a scorcher, even by Mojave standards. But somehow, that was as it should be. He liked it just fine, but most people were not made for the desert heat. Just today, Maddie Wiggins had cold fainted past noon, even with the AC blasting. He'd had to revive her with a wet cloth and sent her home. Her little brother Joey was back in the shop now, probably ogling the girly mags. Then again, Maddie Wiggins was the fainting type. You could tell that just by looking at the girl. A little too slender and delicate, bit too much makeup. No, most folks were not made for the desert heat. Nuh-uh. But the good Lord had figured that Lou was an exception. Maybe his heart gave him a little trouble from time to time. That was normal at his age, and there was no way he was giving up his camels on Dr. Benson's orders. No, sir. He was too old to make or break any new habits. Thank you very much. He was about to finish the last bite of his hot dog when he noticed the car. You couldn't miss them when they came down from the north. The highway was dead straight and flat for miles. This one was gunning it, even out here on the interstate where the speed limit was 180. He strained his eyes to catch a glimpse. It was a compact SUV, a 5-door. Men who drove those in the desert thought they ruled the world, he supposed. Thought of themselves as conquerors braving the desert. He frowned. That looked like a Baoyan. A domestic Chinese model, not even an import. What in piety's name was a Baoyan doing out here in the boonies? The little SUV pulled in. It was spotless white, even out here in the desert. There was not so much as a splotch of red dirt on the mud flaps. He gulped the rest of his dog and stood up. Self-service had long since been the norm, but he still liked to make a show of filling up a patron's tank, talking to them, displaying a little southern hospitality. It was his gas station, after all, and he took personal pride in the customer service, even in this indecent heat. The car pulled in on the left side and stopped. It was indeed a Baoyan. He could see the little diamond horse glinting in the sunlight. Before the engine died, Lou caught a snatch of Handel's See the Conquering Hero Come. The man stepped out of the car. His wide, flattish Chinese features broke out into a smile. He wore a white polo and creased beige chinos. Good luck keeping that clean in the desert, Bob, Lou thought to himself. What a stinker, huh? The man laughed, extracting himself from the car. You can just about say that again. The man's smile faded naturally from his place as he surveyed the gas station. So this is your place? Sure is, Lou admitted. 40 years and going strong. We don't make what you'd call a killing, but we get by. It's nice. The man nodded, looking the place over with a hungry, roving eye. I know this seems a little forward, given that we've only just met, but a sly smile danced over his features, and he cocked his head to one side. You ever thought of selling the old girl on? And we'll leave it there.
I really like what you've done with the world building, and that I think that's a really good example of threading it through. It's always told through the narrator's perspective. So you always get those little bits of opinion and the way they feel about things rather than just paragraphs of explainer.
Yeah, I felt I learned so much about the world and culture by his opinions, his style, the way he spoke, how he viewed things. Like that, it tells you everything straight away about the kind of people who live here.
Yeah, I feel like we've all seen a movie of that town or that place, like the little gas station where there's someone, he's an old guy and he's like, look, I've been here for ages. It's not the best, but it's what I do.
Yeah, it's totally a trope.
It's
old
a trope.
Road, you don't want to go down that road.
Yeah, don't go down there. Yeah. And I think maybe that's why I was able to thread it in that way, because it is a trope. Like it's built in, and that's not
shorthand.
Really, yeah, it's short. Exactly, it's shorthand. And I just particularly love that specific trope, and I felt like I had enough knowledge of it to thread it in a way that wasn't cliche, but also gave the audience kind of what they were expecting from that.
But at the same time, you give us enough specifics, which I think is the key to avoiding something like a trope becoming a cliche. Is you're not just painting him with all these generalizations. He has very specific opinions about this woman, and just knowing that she wears too much makeup. So we know how much makeup, in his view, a woman should wear. And a lot of that bleeds through really well.
Yeah,
and it also, actually, I really like that line as well. I'm glad you picked up on it again, Ali, because it also tells you about the world and the level of humidity. And yeah, I don't know. I thought that was a nice little detail. This is not makeup climate.
I am a big fan of tiny little details that explain a lot. Like I'm reading through your story now, Ali, the stolen sword, and there was just, I don't know why it got me, but there's this one line where Tyron, the armorer's apprentice, says like, "We're Kurokai," we're explaining, and he said dully, and I just thought that line, that specific adjective dully, I thought it sums so much about the mutual understanding of what it meant to be Kurokai. Kurokai are the essentially the magic users in your world. I'm probably simplifying, but yeah, just I love to get really, really specific details into tiny amounts of text, like something where you can just drop it in, and that's like, oh, that's a paragraph unto itself. That's where the magic is in writing for me. Like,
economy of language, right?
Yeah, exactly. Economy of language.
Good stuff. Ali, close us out with a quote if you would.
Beautiful. If you would allow me to self-indulge before our closing, I was going to do a little bit of self-promotion. By the time this podcast comes out, it will be released. But oh gosh, maybe 5 years ago and filmed 2 years ago was a screenplay I wrote. It's had its little cinema run, and it is now releasing on streamers. If you are in the United States, it can be found on Fuse Plus, and it is just about to drop in Australia on Netflix. So the movie is called Unsound. And the 3 little adjectives Netflix decided to give it, which gave me a chuckle this morning, was intimate, heartfelt, and feel good.
I'm surprised that they didn't throw queer in that, though. They seem to like to throw queer in wherever there's a gay character that's anything more than a sort of a sub-focus.
If you look further into its genres, one of its genres is Australian, and I'm like, and then one of them is
where is genre?
LGBT, yes.
Okay.
But essentially we've got a little love story. Fuse TV's little log line is Noah, a disillusioned musician, falls for Finn, a young trans man, as they work together to save his deaf nightclub. So yeah, there's a lot going on. Fun little screenplay. But yes, if you wanted to support that in America or Australia, you can watch it on a streamer.
Folks, it's really good. It's actually a really, really good film. It gets you right in the feels. I got a little bit watery-eyed, I think, toward the end. It's solid.
Thank you, Paddy.
Unsound on Netflix, a very good film.
Very sound.
Very sound.
A very sound recommendation.
Particularly sound.
A lot of world building in it too, funny enough. And all the research and working with the deaf and queer community.
I learned a lot about the deaf community through that film, actually, like things that I hadn't considered. And yeah, I think that's world building. Just explaining a people's context or a cultural context or a world context.
Yeah, and explaining it through plot. Like, we're not sitting down and making a documentary, right? But we have a story, we have a love story, and if you do happen to learn about the deaf community while we're here, then everybody wins. I will close with a quote about world building from Patrick Rothfuss, and he has a great little rant here. The key to good world building is leaving out most of what you create. You, as the author, had damned well better know where all the dragon food comes from. But that doesn't mean that I, as the reader, want to read a 5,000-word essay about you explaining it to me. I don't need to see the math, but I can tell by the details you provide whether or not you've thought these things through to their logical conclusions.
That's so true. No one cares. No one cares about the amount of dragon food.
We want to know that you know, but don't tell us. Jesus Christ.
Rothfuss is actually so good at that. I ate up every last piece of his world building details and I wanted more. I trust Rothfuss's word on anything he has to say about world building and what's too much.
100%. Yes. No, he has fun rants and I have opinions about his rants, but yes, can't fault him for his world building. It is amazing.
It is amazing. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this has been Pros and Cons. I had to remember the hastily decided name there. This has been fun. We'll see you all hopefully next week, possibly with some more members of Precipice Fiction added in. And enjoy your afternoon.
You're listening to Pros and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.